Hi, my name is Michael Chikeen. The smartest people I've met have one common belief, that us silly humans really don't know much. For example, we still don't know why planes stay in the air, or how Tylenol or even gravity works. Yeah, gravity. Look it up. In today's distracted, clickbait, misinformation age, I wish we could all be less certain, more humble, and a lot more curious. Admittedly, I've been known to struggle with all three. So no more, no less, this show is my attempt to be that change. Thanks for joining me, and here we go. Hey everybody, welcome back to No More, No Less. I'm your host, Michael Chikeen, and today in the virtual studio, I have with me Mimi Wu. Mimi is an impact-driven entrepreneur with deep expertise in plastic waste management. Her mission is to accelerate our transition to a zero plastic waste future by reducing plastic production and consumption, building basic waste infrastructure for all communities. Mimi founded one of the world's only post-consumer plastic recycling companies in a country, Myanmar, which consistently ranks in the top 20 hardest countries in the world to conduct business. Since returning to the US in 2021, after Myanmar's military coup, she has been working with industry leaders, startups, and VCs to solve our climate and plastic pollution crisis. Among her many roles, she's currently Secretariat of the Innovation Alliance for a Global Plastics Treaty. So today is going to be everything plastic, and I can't wait to dive in. Mimi Wu, welcome to the show.
Hi, Mike. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I guess because I'm so interested to talk to you about all like this plastic world that we've created that I'm happy to hear someone's fighting. But I really want to start on how your journey through plastics started. So maybe if you can tell us how you ended up in, Myanmar of all places.
Yeah, for sure. I think to start, I'm an impact-driven entrepreneur, and there's always been something since I was young, very deeply ingrained in me that wants to save the world, as idealistic as that sounds. So I've dedicated my life to solving really critical global challenges like having basic access to a clean environment and clean drinking water, to healthcare, to financial access, basically without which all of these foundational blocks, many people are just stuck in poverty and in sickness. So it's kind of with this passion, the enthusiasm, and a very healthy dose of naivete that I founded Myanmar Recycles. And as you mentioned, I'm one of the only companies that tackles post-consumer plastic bags specifically. And we'll touch on why I was one of the only in the world a little bit later on, but it's very much related to a lack of collection infrastructure. But yeah, with Myanmar, as you mentioned, it's based in Myanmar, which is a Southeast Asian country. I lived there for 9 years. And prior to that, I was living in Uganda managing a safe drinking water project, and I just really became so disappointed by how U.S. foreign aid was being utilized in the name of development. And it really became important to me to harness the private sector as a vehicle to solve societal and environmental problems, prioritizing an impact-driven mission, but with also the underpinning of financial sustainability, which is oftentimes missing from that NGO world. And so I started conceptualizing my idea in Uganda for that market, actually. And in 2013, a friend called me out of the blue, and he was like, I'm looking at investments in Myanmar. The country just opened up 2 years ago. There's a market opportunity. I think it can work. Why don't you come and visit? So I was like, yeah, why not? And I got on a plane. I was already heading to Asia, but I added Yangon as a stop. And I basically condensed months of research into 3 days, because that was a whole nother, I didn't really plan that very well. But at the end of the day, it first started with me tracking down a garbage truck and just chasing it down and asking where the garbage went. And kind of just kept, spiraling from there. It's every time I talked to somebody, I would find another person who could give me more information. And a lot of these people that I spoke to in the beginning, they ended up being future customers. I ended up having the first public-private partnership with Yangon City, which is a city of 7 million people. And I met with them the first time I was there. So it was really just kind of meant to be. And I went back to Uganda and packed up my things and moved to Myanmar. But yeah.
Wow. And how many people are in Myanmar in total?
There's about 50 to 60 million. Yeah. They just
My
recently done.
God,
Yeah.
my ignorance is shining very brightly
Yeah.
today. I had
No.
no idea it was that big of a country.
Yeah.
Um,
It also,
because
oh, sorry to
yeah,
interrupt, but it also borders, 5 different countries, including China and India. So it's a pretty, it's a geological, critical spot.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that number is quite astounding for how big it is. You definitely had your work cut out for you. And it was really nice to hear that you wanted to do something to change the world, save the world, because we really hear a lot of that rhetoric coming from many entrepreneurs that are doing all sorts of things, like creating a social media app or a crypto app, and I want to and there are real problems that we can address that don't need technology, that need people on the ground that are creating things. And I mean mechanical things or systems in place. And so it's really amazing to hear that you're chasing the garbage truck down.
Yeah.
And you're like, listen, where is this going? You're trying to find out a secret or figure out how to start the problem. And I think any problem can probably start at the beginning like that for someone that actually wants to help.
Yeah.
So I guess I'd like to get back into Myanmar, but I want to kind of have an umbrella over this conversation. I mean, maybe we can start by more of a macro view for exactly how fucked are we plastic wise? There's islands in of plastic in every major ocean. We've all seen the photos. I think most people want to turn a blind eye to it. There's people that say, oh, why do we have to drink with these metal straws? Is our straws really going to help? And yeah, every little bit helps. I don't even know what this argument is. If we can get rid of any plastic, I don't know why we don't do it. But maybe you can help, explain to all of us how bad this problem actually is.
Yeah. So I think it's first important to know that plastics are made from petroleum, like oil and gas. So it's made from a fossil fuel. And so when I talk about why plastics are such a problem, I'm talking about the impact that plastic production, consumption, and waste generation is having on our climate, and by extension, just the basic existence and survival of every living thing on this planet. So I'll say that plastics has revolutionized industries and society in terms of medical advances, technology advances. When we think about cars, for example, vehicles, ironically, plastics have been used to make vehicles lighter and less energy intensive. But the thing is that we are producing roughly 380 million tons of plastic every year, and we're throwing away nearly the same amount, which basically indicates that much of our plastic is single use, right? So that's kind of that's a huge number. And the plastics industry itself is, over $600 billion in size, and it's expected to continue growing every single year. So, I mean, those are huge numbers. I mean, I can't honestly fathom what it means, what it looks like. But what I do know is that from personal experience, I've literally been to rivers where you would think that the river doesn't exist. It's just an extension of land because there's that much garbage and you can't see the water underneath.
Where's that?
I mean, those are in places that, they don't have strong waste collection or regulation. So I've been in Southeast Asia specifically. But I live in New York. I mean, I see cans overflowing with cups and containers every single day. And every time I go out in nature, anywhere in the world, forests, beaches, I mean, I see plastic and I do pick it up, which is, I think that's an action we can all take.
Yeah.
But we've just been really trapped, I guess, in a throwaway culture, a culture that chases the new and the convenient. And the trade-off is that we're really burying ourselves in plastic and we end up poisoning ourselves. Literally, well, we can talk about why that is, but we're poisoning ourselves, our planet, and we're literally driving to extinction animals and plants. So this is a huge issue, and plastic just doesn't degrade, unfortunately. It just becomes smaller to where it's microscopic, which is where, hence microplastics.
Right.
Yeah. But I think you were talking about why should we kind of care about this? I mean, plastic is such a visual blight. You can turn a blind eye if you want, but it's also a health hazard. It's not just something physical that we see. It's dangerously embedded in our food, in most of the world's tap water, and in our bottled water as well. And this is in poor nations and rich nations. I mean, in fact, they did a survey in 2017, and the U.S. had the of the samples that they took, nearly 95% of all of the US's tap water samples had microplastics, which is like insane, right? Yeah.
And these are all things I think if everyone would just look around, I think we would kind of guess at a number similar to that, you
Yeah.
know? And the problem is like, it's so daunting. And so that's why I want to see even more impressed by someone like you that like, I'm going to go tackle this gigantic whale of an issue, is because like, even so, I'm not vegan, but I do eat tofu, I eat plant-based meats. I try to, reduce my meat consumption as much as possible. But even some of these, like what I'm buying tofu in, what I'm buying these meat replacements in, it still comes in plastic.
Yeah.
And so if like the people, I guess maybe like me, like other vegans or people that are more conscious of what they're consuming, you can't even buy this stuff in like a glass container, or you'd have to go to a grocery store. Actually, this doesn't exist, but like you'd have to say, okay, I'd like some tofu, and they have to take it out of a glass container, cut it for you, you put it in your own glass container and go home. But like none of us want to do this because it's inconvenient, and I count myself as one of these people. Like I'm like, I would love to do it, I would love it to be the only option so that I had no choice.
Yeah.
And so I think all of us, even the best intentioned of us, want to transition to having no plastic, but it's hard.
Absolutely. I mean, I always stress that the onus of changing and solving the plastic pollution crisis is not on the individual. It's really on corporations and government to be making these choices. Because just as you said, we live in a society that unfortunately we want to do good, and the choice is not available to us. And yeah,
Right.
it's a difficult conversation. It's a very complex issue. To solve, honestly. And it begins a lot with building infrastructure, so that's in place, but also putting in some policies that really incentivize, KPIs and action where we're promoting a regenerative like future.
Right.
Yeah.
I've said this on this program many times that like the destruction of the planet is going up commensurately. That's probably
Oh my
not how that
gosh.
word's sent, with how convenient our lives are. Like the more convenient
Absolutely.
we are, the world's just going completely to shit. And so like maybe you can help us understand exactly how plastic waste management works, for example. Like this is going to be like a grade 3 presentation that you're going in. Like you've seen those like 50s cartoons for how they teach kids how things work. So like I'm at home, I use all my plastics, I put it into that shiny blue bin outside or wherever in Spain, it's on the corners. What happens then?
Yeah. So many people often ask, is my plastic being recycled? And
Right.
can plastic be recycled? And then why is
Right.
only 9% of plastic globally recycled? And the short answers to all of those are yes, your plastic is being recycled and it can be recycled, but only if we have an ideal situation, which is like if there is a strong waste management infrastructure in place, if the entire process is cost effective, if what you're recycling is clean enough, and if there's a valuable end use for that plastic product, right? Because recycling at the end of the day is a business. So many,
Right.
many of these systems and market conditions don't exist throughout our world in poor and in rich nations. And that's why only 9% of the plastic is being recycled, if that.
Right.
So,
Okay. And sorry for you
Yeah.
said if it's clean enough. Can you touch on that a bit?
yeah,
'Cause
sure.
I might be an offender here.
We all probably are. I mean, there are
Right.
few countries in the world, I think like Taiwan is one of the only, where you need to clean your recyclables before you put them into the bin. But
Okay.
yeah, it definitely depends. So the life cycle of plastic, like in very short basic terms, is that petroleum is used to make virgin or brand new plastic. That's created into a pellet or resin, which is the raw material that is used to make a new plastic product. It's sold or given to you and me as consumers, and then we throw it in the trash. So the ideal scenario is that you would wash the plastic, because quality into this supply chain stream means quality out. The more, like the dirtier that it is, first of all, a lot of the stakeholders along the supply chain, they don't really want to touch super dirty stuff because it's just so costly to clean it. It's just like time intensive, and the end product may not actually be valuable enough because the margins in this business are actually quite slim.
Right.
Yeah, but the ideal would be that you would wash it and then separate it by that plastic type, which is the number that's usually found on the bottom of the container, that 1 through 7.
Mm-hmm.
And number 1, for example, is like PET. It's a water bottle. Typically, number 2 is HDPE, which is typically found like in laundry detergent, household packaging. And then it goes through a supply chain of a company then picks it up, takes it to what's called a materials recovery facility or a MRF for further sortation and baling. And then that bale is then sold to a company that's going to wash it, shred it, and then maybe even melt it down into a new pellet, or that might be a whole nother company doing that. By the way, that's like 4 different players. And in Myanmar, my company did 3 of those parts simply because that supply chain just doesn't exist. So I had to do the collection, sortation, washing, recycling really by myself.
Right.
And
it goes to show why you're doing more consulting now in, I guess you can call it the first world or in the West now, because like if you had to be hands-on for every part of that process, you would understand it so well to say like, okay, we can do this better or that better. And I guess how are we doing in like U.S. and you spent some time in Canada for some companies you're advising on, like how are things going in this part of the world? Like there's like, man, this feels like such a big problem. Every time I even think of 40 questions come up.
Yeah.
And it seems a little dire. So like, yeah, I'd love to know how we're doing in this part of the world, and then maybe we'll get to some other stuff after that.
Yeah. Well, not well. I think is the short answer. Not well. I mean, things like glass and aluminum are pretty well recycled. They are indefinitely, you can recycle them forever. Plastics, no. And a lot of that is, in the US, for example, recycling is commingled. So you're throwing away metals, glass, aluminum, and all types of plastics together, which already creates an inefficiency in the system. It creates more work for the MRF to do. And on top of that, a lot of people are doing wish cycling, putting stuff in there that your local MRF just like can't accept. And so you're basically sending them garbage, and that just adds extra cost to them, right? And that's why we're seeing in the US a lot of MRFs have been closing down recently. I think they just can't like operate. They don't have enough money to operate. I mentioned, the whole like cleanliness thing, right? So that like quality in means quality out. Higher quality out fetches a higher market value. And it's actually why I was one of the only companies in the world to tackle post-consumer plastic bags and mechanically recycle them, because economically it really didn't make sense. And in hindsight, I would not recommend mechanical recycling for film or plastic bags. Because, I mean, just think of it conceptually. When you get a plastic bag, what do you do with it? I mean, what do you do? Like, you throw it under your sink and it stays there for about like 5,000 years, right? But then when you finally take it...
Right. Yeah, so what I do with it, I normally use it for garbage or to put plastic back into it
to
then recycle.
No, exactly. Yeah, you use it as a garbage bag. And so you're like putting all your organic scraps in there, all your whatever other stuff that just rots together and is horrendous. And then it goes to a place, somebody like me who goes and sorts it all out and tries to recycle it. But with bags, because they're so thin, you have to get it incredibly clean. Otherwise, when you blow it out to make a new plastic bag, it creates like holes and it just ends up being garbage. So that's why a lot of companies really prefer using virgin, which is, it's something that we're trying to tackle with policy and regulation around the world. And also...
As in they want like virgin bags?
They would, a lot of manufacturers would prefer to use virgin or brand new plastic because it's just so much easier to work with. And then it's usually in a natural, like a clear color, so you can dye it anything you want.
Right, but that's not the problem we have. We have to recycle this plastic. You're like, that's great, but that's not what we need.
Yeah, exactly.
And so like I try to get a lot of my groceries delivered, or if I go, so I'll try to use a recyclable bag, sort of like a cloth bag or whatever. But like, what about like the carton bags? Like, how recyclable are those? I know it's kind of tangential to plastic, but I wonder if you know that as well.
Carton being like a paper
Like a sorry,
cardboard kind of.
they call it carton here. Yeah, yeah, like cardboard. Like yeah,
Yeah, I
right.
think that's much easier to recycle. That has a higher recycling rate than a lot of plastics, but it does take a lot of water to do that, and I think it needs to be clean. I know, you heard don't put your pizza box into the recycling because the oil is just too contaminated, right? It's going to take too much effort to clean it. Yeah.
Noted.
Yeah. But can I
Yeah.
also say that a lot of times those reusable cloth bags are actually made with plastic. So,
What?
not to put like stress on everyone, but yeah.
I have a couple like bags that I use for the grocery store. One is I don't even know where I got it. I think one is sustainable. Another one's cloth. Another one's like I don't know. Now I'm getting more bags just to have less bags. I get why like the people that are really shitty about climate change that are like there's no point of doing anything. Like I think they're I take offense with a lot of stuff that they say, but like I understand why they feel so helpless. Whereas I think maybe like you and I will understand that the problem is quite large, and
Yeah.
try to like at least do something. I think maybe they input this feeling of helplessness as in like it's impossible, nothing can be done. Why is anybody trying to get me to do anything? Which is
Right.
obviously the wrong way, but like I do understand how monstrous these sorts of ideas are. And so I guess what sort of impact did you have in because you started basically from ground zero
Yeah.
in Myanmar. There was no infrastructure to do this whatsoever. So you were there for a total of how long? Like a couple of years?
I was there for 9 years actually, but the company,
9 years.
yeah, we
Shit.
were running for about 5 years before the coup.
Right.
Yeah.
And so how did what was your progress from ground zero when you started to when you left?
Yeah, definitely challenging for sure. I mean, I said that there's 7 million people in Yangon, and we were working out of the largest landfill both in Yangon and in all of Myanmar. So they were taking in when I first started, they were taking in about 800 tons of waste every day, and plastic accounts for about 10% of that. And it's about doubled, I think now. And plastic bags, they're really light, and so, I mean, it's even less by weight. It's going to be less than 10%, but it's such a blight. We ended up being able to recycle 4 million pounds or 1,800 metric tons of discarded plastic
Wow.
bags. Yeah, and we were dealing with very end of life. So the plan was actually before the coup, and before the coup, yeah, we were trying to get as close to the first waste generator as possible, so at the household level. That requires so much investment, and that's why I think recycling and waste management in general is so complex. I mean, the root cause of it is that we just don't have enough infrastructure on the ground, that physical infrastructure to manage it.
Right.
Don't have enough trucks, don't have enough people to deal with it. And so it creates a lot of inefficiencies. I'm personally having to go and collect it myself. Yeah, and as I said, it requires a lot of capex and opex, and with the coup happening, a lot of those financial access avenues really dried up, and so it became kind of unviable to continue on that business. But we
Right.
we were working with like 60 different aggregators. We had a total of 250 waste collectors that we were working with, so we're impacting like close to 1,000 livelihoods, if not more,
Wow.
which is really, I think it's really beautiful. I mean, that's why I started the business. It's like to help clean up the environment, but also help to provide employment for people who are super marginalized, who are working informally in places like Myanmar, which makes up, I mean, 2/3 of the world does not have formal waste collection. A third of the world is they're illegally dumping, they're burning their plastic, they're throwing it into the rivers, they're burying it onto their lands, right? So because the infrastructure just doesn't exist. And actually a story to kind of highlight that, like, these are not news stories. These are like, this is daily life. This is real. That's happening every single day. But we, well, so in Uganda, for example, this is like my first experience of what waste management is like. I was living in a more rural area in Western Uganda, and I lived in this beautiful house that had countless flowers in the garden. I had a gazebo. It was like fruit trees. It was just like very idyllic. And I was trying to find where the garbage went because I had somebody at the house help me with that. And I asked her one day, her name is Margaret. I was like, Margaret, just in case you're not here one day, I want to manage my own trash. Like, can you please show me, where do you take it? Does somebody come and pick it up every week? And she's like, oh yeah, come here, you know? So we went outside into the beautiful garden and we walk over to the edge of the property, and there's like literally a pit dug with all the things that I had just thrown away the week before, including I'd done like a huge sweep of the house. There was like a lamp that the wire had snapped. So, and because I had just come from the US, which is where I'm from, I didn't have the mentality of we can repair this. I just thought, oh, it's broken, so I'm just gonna throw it away. And it's just like, I mean, it's just gonna be there forever. I'm pretty sure it's still there.
Right.
Yeah, so that's one example. But like even in Yangon, I was living in one of the most expensive neighborhoods there, and we have formal waste collection in that neighborhood. You know, people can afford to have somebody pick it up, but you would be enjoying the day and suddenly see like billows of smoke or just smell something like horribly acrid and be like, oh yeah, someone's just set a pile of like leaves and trash on fire. Yeah.
Right.
So
well, it seems like yours is, I think, much more acute that you're able to see these things. But I think it seems like we're kind of venturing towards that in the West. So like there is, so I'm in Barcelona. There's plenty of trash collection. They do it at times that people should be sleeping. But like all the trash is collected. It's very efficient. But if nothing is getting recycled enough, like that trash is just being put out of our purview.
Yeah.
They'll burn it somewhere. They're putting it in a pit. They're putting it in, a landfill, which is a gigantic pit. So like all we're doing is just taking it away from our site until it becomes everywhere around us, and then we have to start piling it in our homes. Like, this is the real issue, and unfortunately, it always comes back to there's too many of us humans on the planet. Unfortunately, like that seems to be like the common denominator for all these climate issues, and plastic seems like to be number one with a bullet of proof that like there's just too many silly humans on this planet. So like let's go away for a second for the practical problems and solutions. Like if you could wave a Harry Potter wand and create like a new system, world, or whatever around, like what are some things that you would have us doing? Like let's pretend like we have a lottery ticket, like a magic lottery ticket, and we won. We can do whatever we want with it.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear how you would redesign things.
This is a fun question. I think that, wow. First of all, I mean, we've already talked about the infrastructure. We're kind of moving away from that. I mean, Sweden is such a gold standard. I would love to kind of highlight them. They're doing a lot of waste to energy conversion. So what they do is, first of all, they have sortation bins set up within like 300 meters of every single residential household. So it's very easy for you to just put your things in there. But yeah, if we didn't have plastic, what would we use? I mean, glass and aluminum, for example, materials, as I said, are infinitely recyclable. I would reimagine systems, or even using paper. Why are we putting, I don't know, berries in plastic? Why don't we just put it in a paper bag? Or, Europe is already doing that so beautifully. But Sweden is also doing this waste to energy conversion, where they are using technologies like pyrolysis and gasification to basically take all the organic material, all the plastics and everything, and generating household heat and energy with it. It's also reducing the reliance on landfills. So, I mean, that's on the management side of it. I kind of touched on as well as about the production side. I mean, simply just turning off the tap, that is like the fastest way that we can manage the problem. Stop using single-use plastics and trying to find alternatives to it. I know that there are plastic alternative technologies being developed, things like using seaweed or other biodegradable material, sugar cane, for example. I think that's really fascinating. In the past, I think I was always a bit cautious because typically biodegradable materials historically were made with plastic in them, which wasn't disclosed. It's not a super standardized or regulated market yet. So often including them in traditional recycling waste streams really messes things up. But it's not a perfect solution yet, but I think that it's being developed, which is great. And I'd also love to create innovation by looking to our past. we didn't always use plastic for packaging. We can consider bulk buying, for example. There's fascinating technology like dehydrating solutions down into tablets for household cleaner, or laundry detergent into sheets. Right? So you just eliminate the need for packaging in general. And it's thinking about how can we create and initiate system change, not just like an alternative package, but just how do we create systems where you mentioned like a return. Okay, and I'm even going to out myself, but I recently started a food delivery service. I've been vehemently against it, but I decided to finally do it because for many reasons. One, I just have ADHD. It's really hard for me to just like sit down and make myself a meal. It was impacting my productivity. So I was like, okay, a few times a week I'm going to have something be delivered. But they're delivering. What's great is they deliver in these reusable bags with ice packs, which they take back every time you order something. But they don't take back the packaging, which is just like a PET container. And I've actually contacted them to be like, hey, would you consider putting it maybe, like you said, in glass? And then we just return it every time. And you put a deposit on so that if someone doesn't return it, they end up paying for it, for example. But I think that would be a really interesting kind of solution.
Yeah, because everything I get delivered now mostly is in... God, all I can think of is carton, but like I guess cardboard. Yeah, everything is paper or cardboard that's delivered. So like that part's really good here, and I try to recycle a ton of cardboard, but I think food delivery is a really tough one. But I mean, like I'd like to hear you mentioned aluminum. Like, what's the percentage of aluminum that we can recycle, and how clean does it have to be?
100%. I don't think you need to be super clean because most of it's going to be post-consumer used. You know, like you think of a soda can, you don't have to necessarily wash it out. They've got it down, but you can recycle that pretty much infinitely, which is great. The thing is that when you extract virgin, it's very costly environmentally, and but yeah, you can recycle that infinitely. Glass pretty much as well, which is pretty amazing.
But even like, so the aluminum foil that I use, let's say to make dinner or whatever to cook with, like we could be recycling that?
You can, although I just learned that when you put it into your recycling bin, because sometimes I was putting in such small little pieces and it's kind of hard to pick that up, I think. But so you kind of want to ball it up like something like that, like bigger than my fist. And then you can put it into your recycling. It should, when it goes through the MRF, it should be able to be picked up.
Where would I put it? Because I can't. There's not even a like. Would I put it in the plastic? Like I don't even know
metal.
where I would put it.
I think you'd put it in the metal, like the aluminum, with the aluminum.
Oh, I don't even know where that would be.
Oh, really?
I know where the glass is. I don't even know where I would put metal. Okay, I'll have to figure that out. Because that is ridiculous that we could be using aluminum and we're not. But with what you said, let's say tomorrow, Harry Potter spell, everything that's plastic, we could that could be changed over. We start using aluminum. Would that cause like a catastrophe for extracting that from the planet?
I think probably, yes, because we don't have enough that we currently, so it's just, we need to find materials. Yeah, exactly. It's
right. Okay.
We
so
need more than
that's not even a solution.
Yeah, we need more than we currently have in the system, I think. And even I think also soda cans, I think they're made with about 40% recycled content. So don't quote me on that, but it's not 100% recycled. So they're still having to extract virgin kind of metal to make things like that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yet another problem. Okay. So that I guess like let's segue into technology, because you have a lot of these technocrats that think everything on the planet can be solved with technology. I think that's complete and utter horse shit. I think it stops people from doing a lot of like real things like you're doing for example. But in the back of my mind, the optimist wants to believe that soon we're going to create something that is going to solve all of this, but I do think that's kind of a naive area. But so what do you think are some technologies that actually are maybe online now or about to come online or like in the future that will help this problem and you with your fight?
Yeah. I think that the solutions to this existing crisis, like the technology already exists. and we just have barriers to implementing and scaling it. And I absolutely agree. I
Right.
think that there's a lot of emphasis on software technology, especially in the West, in industrialized nations. There's a lot of money going to that, mostly because investors want a quick return and they're hoping for a software unicorn, whereas the real
Sure.
root of the problem is, as I've said again and again, well, that we're just not prioritizing solutions that have significant impact and that are addressing the root problems because they're super expensive. They require a lot of capex and opex, and they usually require a lot of stakeholders to implement because we're talking about creating like public services. So government needs to also be involved.
Right.
But the technology with government policy thinking, I've said this like numerous times already, but building formal waste management systems, especially where those don't exist. This is just super basic trash collection established in every single community. My thesis is always been plastic waste is a physical problem and it demands physical solutions. So trash cans, sortation bins, trucks, as I said before. Without having a formal place to discard waste, we just continue to see it mismanaged, burned, buried, and
Right.
having no regard or consequence. So that's one of the ways. I also really do support, recycling we're doing 9% of recycling. It's, I think, really unrealistic to think we're going to get to 100%, which is a circular economy,
Right.
but I still think that it's worthwhile to invest in mechanical and chemical recycling, especially if we can get the parts before it correct, in terms of separating properly, cleaning properly. I mentioned Sweden being a really great gold standard for having the bins, really close to their residential households, and then also doing their waste to energy conversion. That's really interesting. But with recycling, having that in place in general, because there are some plastics like PET bottles that are great for mechanical recycling and it has really high value and it's recycled at it's in urban areas, there's sometimes like 90% collection rate because it's such a valuable product. So it's
What is PET?
oh, sorry, water bottles. So water
Oh,
bottles,
okay.
yeah, or like in the US milk jugs, those like kind of opaque
Yeah, the hard
yeah,
plastic.
cleared. Exactly. That is in such high demand that it's never generally exported to other countries because there's such a huge domestic demand to recycle it. And
Right.
so it's
Yeah,
also,
like, we should get rid of water bottles tomorrow.
yeah, like why are we doing
Like, why, I think that's the most frustrating part for me is that like there is such low hanging fruit that we just ignore simply because of commerce. Like
Yeah.
Nestle would lobby a government or someone would get sued, but like it would be nice if we had like a logical electorate that could say, listen, we don't need water bottles. They can go in these giant plastic jugs or whatever, and then people can bring them home and we can pour them in glass. We can pour them in. I don't know if buying one of those Yeti things is a good idea or not, because then everyone's going to have one of those, and who knows what. I mean, like, so I think
Yeah.
I think this also is the part where people feel a little helpless, because like we also need a flow chart to be like, okay, if I stop using water bottles, I don't want to carry around a glass bottle all the time. There's 4,000 different options for water bottles, like from a Yeti to a
yeah.
whatever they're called. And so it's like, well, I don't know, does this have a type of plastic in it I shouldn't be using? And I think people just need help and all these things. I think that's one of the more frustrating parts for everybody. Like everyone wants to do something good for this, but if you stop doing this, it's hard to decide on a different route. Like have you
Yeah.
seen that? Like does that make sense?
Well, I mean, in a way, you're just saying let's make it effortless for individuals to take the action that they really want, right? So, like, maybe
Right.
we just install more public water fountains, for example,
Right.
instead of selling. Yeah. I mean, I went to I think it was in JFK. Well, I don't want to out them, but like to an airport in New York, because I can't remember if it was them or it was another, but I couldn't find a water fountain that was working. And I feel like they almost did it on purpose. They wanted, and then I went to a restaurant. I was like, would you mind filling up my water bottle? And they're like, yeah, because we're not busy. I'll help you out right now. But generally, they want us to like sell you a bottle. So exactly that, like you're saying, it's based on commerce. It's based on, I feel like the whole problem of climate change, of like plastic pollution, it's very much because people are profiting off of it, So that's a whole other system change that we need to make as well. And yeah, I mean, there are a lot of individuals. I stressed government and corporate action, but individuals can make a huge difference as well. Look at Greta Thunberg, because of her youth movement. Every single candidate in the EU has like some kind of green platform when they run, just because they're realizing how important it is to constituents, right? Or look at the youth in Montana who just sued the state because they were promoting fossil fuels at the expense of environmental health. So it's pretty amazing what individuals can do, and really press governments, to take systematic change, to make systematic change.
Right. Well, one thing you said that I often forget is that, we need petroleum to create all of these plastics. And so as we continue to extract and burn and process all this petroleum, like at one point, it's going to run out.
Yeah.
And so like we are going to have to make these changes eventually. And, it's going to be quite dire at that time. So it's like, can we make, I guess we probably went over it, like, because you can't really make, what plastic is now from something else. Like we always have to take something to use something else. Like at least glass, you can have it and you can use it for generations. Like, all the Italian immigrants that I know in Canada still do. They'll use something until their kids force them to throw it out. And I think there's a lot of hilarity in that, but like there's also a lot of value in that. Like we don't need to throw this out. Like we'll just use it. And I think that's kind of, we're living in more of a disposable society now, be it like headphones or phones. Like I have to battle with myself every month to not buy a new phone. And I've had it for like, I don't know, maybe three or 4 years now. And I'm like, it works fine. You don't need a new phone, but like I want a new phone.
Yeah.
Do you know? And it's the same thing, I guess. Like you want to go somewhere, you grab a water bottle. You want to do these things, and like, and these are things that I'm also guilty of. I need to get better at. So I guess what would you say to someone who says that, like, and I've met these people that they're saying like, there's no point of recycling. It doesn't actually get recycled. There's no point. Like, is there any good message that, if any of them happen to listen to this, or just for me, the next time I have to hear them, that I have something intelligent to say?
Well, like you said, much of the world's plastic isn't actually being recycled, which is horrible. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't stop, because it's a really important habit, behavior that, has taken kind of decades for us to get society to actually implement. I think very much that reuse, I love that. I mean, even if you buy a plastic bottle, you can reuse it again. You don't need to throw it away immediately, right? That's something that we can think about. I think it's just really making conscious decisions about the kind of materials we're taking, the kind of just the actions we take in general, like bulk buy I mentioned as well, right? Just making choices that when you have an option to buy something in glass or metal rather than plastic, to do it, And then
it sounds like that person is right. It sounds like the idea is that we should move to personally using more glass or alternatives to plastic, and reduce our consumption as much as possible. But recycling itself, plastic-wise, is a bit futile. Is that right?
Well, recycling, it's so complex. It's hard for me to kind of answer this question. So, I think that
are we both going to end this interview crying? Like, is that where we're headed? Maybe
I don't know. I think we might be. I mean, kind of on that. There was a whole media flurry a few years ago that the West sends its trash to poor countries. And this is true, but like, the buyer that's receiving the trash is typically paying for all the shipping and the material because they want it. So there is still a lot of value in recycling. Like when we create plastic, like I said, PET water bottles are actually, especially in urban areas, it's it has a really high collection rate and a really high recycling rate because it has a really valuable end market value. And people are using it not just to turn it back into plastic bottles, but also using it to make clothes and carpets and all kinds of manner of things, right? So when we talk about recycling, why it's only 9%, it's because there are a lot of types of plastic, like film packaging, that doesn't have value at the end, or just it's hard economically to make sense of it. And so it's really thinking about how do we change those packaging into something that's a lot more valuable. And yeah, so I mean, I think that would kind of, yeah, there's definitely value still in plastics. Also, importantly, as I said, it's really hard to change consumer behavior. So I really don't want to abandon the progress that we've made to normalize recycling. It's definitely a solution. It's definitely, it is kind of a Band-Aid in the end, because the ultimate solution is just turning off the tap of creating single-use plastics. But yeah, this model still kind of works in a way, and we really just need to think about changing what the business model of recycling is, so that yeah, everything is recyclable. But
well, even like 9% isn't nothing compared to how much plastic we have in the world. So the fact that like we don't have to use more of it is super helpful. But like the message that I'm getting is that, for one, like you are a plastic warrior, and we do need more people like you that are out there trying to help the problem, opposed to just pretending it doesn't exist. But it seems like what I've taken away from this, aside from how fucked we are plastic wise, is that like I really need to be more intentional when I use plastic. I need to get a refillable bottle to take to the gym and things like that, which I've been putting off. And just when I buy things, try to buy things that are in paper and plastic, because the recycle rate is so much higher than buying something in plastic. Does that fit with what you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for individual action, we unfortunately live within the constraints of what society offers us right now, and that's why I really do keep stressing that we need to have like background investment in the infrastructure, because if we can improve the infrastructure, then we can increase the recycling rates, for example, right? But yeah, in terms of like, it's all the little choices as an individual that add up to reducing your plastic consumption. And it's things like, I mean, try to avoid doing takeout, I suppose. I know it's hard for a lot of people, but if you do, ask them not to include plastic utensils in those sauce packets all the time, which are going to just go into a drawer and like you completely forget about it until you throw it out. New York is actually going to start fining restaurants and third-party vendors that include excessive plastics and packets in your delivery if you've opted out, which is kind of interesting.
I really order from 3 places on rotation, and they all, I think most of their, if not all of their things, come in cardboard or paper. So, just more reason to eat out.
Yeah.
Or from those guys.
Yeah, exactly. There are a few companies also with delivery. They're trying to do a system where they send you like a metal or glass container, and then you send it back to them. So this is for like takeout, which is really interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like this is what you talked about in the very beginning. But yeah, offering that option. So that's kind of revolutionary, and hopefully that will scale. But even when you do go to a restaurant, oftentimes if I have leftovers, I do ask them, like, what do you package this in? And if it's plastic, I've been told, oh, it's paper. And then they've given it to me, and the bottom is paper and the top is plastic. And I was like, so we often don't even visually see. And like, this is kind of, yeah. I mean, even with friends, I'll go out, I'm at a store and they'll get a plastic bag for their checkout items. And I'm like, I'll kind of like cheekily lean over and be like, do you really need that? Do you really need that bag? And they're like, oh yeah, I didn't even think about the fact that I really don't need it. Right. And so it's just like putting that into people's minds.
Yeah. And some people would get angry by someone being like, oh, don't shame me for getting a plastic bag. You're like, I'm not trying to shame you. Yeah. I'm trying to save this from being wrapped around a seal's neck.
Right.
And like, and it being like absorbed into my body somehow in the next 5 years. Like, I think like we need a little bit more plastic shaming or like education, because like you don't have to tell someone they're an asshole.
Right.
But like if you're going out with someone and they're like even yesterday I was getting groceries and the guy just gave me a plastic bag, and I was like, well, can I just get the cardboard one? He's like, oh, okay, no problem. But like little things like that,
Yeah.
that I think because I'm aware of it, and we were having this conversation the next day, so maybe plastics was in my head. But like I think if we just had friends that were like, why don't you get carton? I don't know, those are tough, but I
Yeah.
think we need more like plastic narcs, recycling narcs,
Yeah.
in our lives. But
Yeah. And you don't have to do it in like a mean way, just kind of funny way. Or just
Yeah.
like, yeah. But even when sometimes I've gone to friends' houses and they will set out like plastic cutlery and tableware, which is kind of like, I don't understand because we're just like at your house,
That's egregious.
Yeah. And so I've actually just asked them, like, I've been known to just ask for a non-plastic option and I'll just offer to wash it for them so they don't even have to think about it. And they're like, yeah,
Right.
that's totally fine, but it's just like making these little changes so it just kind of incepts into people's minds, into your friends' minds.
Right. Well, yeah, I've seen people that like if they're having a dinner party, sometimes they're having plastic everything. So then basically they take up the whole table and they just put it all in the garbage.
Yeah.
And you're like, guys, come on.
Yeah.
Like even dinner parties now are being hijacked by plastic. So I don't know. So I guess with that said, to wrap up, is there anything that maybe we left out that you would really want to share that's super important to you that maybe we didn't cover yet?
So much, Mike. As you know, I prepared extensively for this.
Yeah.
I think that what I would really like to say that we didn't really touch on is that I think it's really important for Western countries to support the global South in the transition to the green economy.
Okay.
So that's kind of a huge issue. We talked on a lot about individual action that both. So hold on. Let me just say that individual action, as I said, it's not our entire responsibility to be making systematic change to the plastic pollution crisis, but we can still take individual action, and I think it's really been powerful. We've seen powerful examples of it that I've shared already.
Right.
But as we also transition our own like Western societies, we try to build on efficiencies in the collection system. We also need to be supporting developing countries for major reasons like plastic pollution. Well, okay, here's a big fact. About 51% of all of our world's plastic production is in Asia, and they are producing items for us to be using, in our countries. And so,
Right.
so yeah, and so we're producing something in an area that doesn't have strong regulation, doesn't have strong environmental like infrastructure, and then polluting their environment for our own benefit. So actually, in an equity point of view, we do have a responsibility to be supporting better policy, better infrastructure.
Right.
There,
Can you
just
be specific for what is the global South? Like,
Oh, sure. Yeah, we're thinking like Southeast Asia, basically lower to kind of middle income countries. I wouldn't necessarily include middle income, but like lower income countries. So we're thinking a lot of places, most of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of the countries in Southeast Asia, places in Latin America. And also thinking about, the global north, as we'd call it. We have been major emitters of greenhouse gases, which are huge. So with plastic production, extraction of the petroleum, we're contributing like so much to carbon dioxide emissions. And so we're emitting so much of the world's like carbon dioxide, and yet where are the carbon sinks? They are in places like Brazil, Congo, and Indonesia, these lower income and middle income countries. These rainforests are doing the heavy lifting for carbon dioxide removal for the benefit of all of us, right? So if I'm dumping plastic into the river in Myanmar as well, like this is also something to think about, how we're all connected. It's going into a river that's connected to the Indian Ocean, basically, which is connected to like all the other oceans. And we're fishing out of all these oceans. We're consuming plastic from fish, all the time. So we're all interconnected, and it's super important as as countries who are emitting more, and also as countries who have historically extracted natural resources from these from the global South for our own benefit. It's an equity responsibility here that we need to be investing for the collective benefit of all of us.
Right. Yeah, I think we kind of that is a big.
That's a big topic. I know. Maybe we shouldn't have ended there.
No, it's okay. I definitely got some time. I think because I think it's again it's another monster. Like for like how do I make a difference when you say we need to be investing? Like it's hard for people to for one, if I wanted to give today, I wouldn't know where to give money to.
Sure.
Secondly, as you mentioned, like there's governments should be taking the lead on this, and most of them can't see, the forest for the trees on a lot of these issues, unfortunately. But I think we oftentimes, like we think about, Africa or India or all the impoverished in China as in like it doesn't affect us. But the way that capitalism and globalism works now, like the workforce and all of these things, like the U.S. giving basically all of their production for all of their goods, more or less, to China has enabled them to do all the things that they're doing now that the U.S. again is angry about. We're like, well, where do you think they got all these riches? It's from the West. It's from Europe. It's from sending all their production there because they wanted cheaper goods so they could make more profits. So like this isn't like this is a monster that the West has created in certain respects. As far as plastics, like, man, so like how can we even start to think about the global south for how we like, because individually obviously the answer is reduce your plastic use as much as possible.
Yeah.
But is there anything out there that we can do as far as like even raising awareness for how important this is?
Yeah, I mean, I think just educating, listening to your podcast, this episode.
Yeah, there you go. Appreciate that.
It's like really getting the attention of government investors. As I mentioned before, a lot of investors, there's a lot of money in this world to like solve like basically all of our global challenges, right? But they maybe don't have equitable return, or they don't have like huge returns, or they have really slow returns. So it's also, if you have the ear of investors, if you're managing funds, really to think about, is my dollar actually going to impact the world in a really significant way? If that's part of your thesis, and if it isn't, I think it should be, right?
Right.
Why do we need another app to like find your missing shoe? You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
or another yacht.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And so really, I think educating your networks is something powerful that we can do. And if you have the ear of people who are in positions of power or have access to capital, to really be, bringing their attention to some of the issues, some of the ways that they can make a difference, But as you said, governments, and not just investors actually, because in the global south, as you said, this is a public service. Governments should really be involved, but in a lot of places that are low income, they just don't have the means to do it. So it's the development finance institutions like the IMF, the IFC that are going to be investing in these countries. And I used to work for the World Bank Group as well. They're great, but they're looking at some of the sizes of their investments are just way too large. It's like a minimum of $20 million, right? But a lot of the infrastructure just isn't even there. And some of the small players, they need capital to grow and scale. It's a great solution. It's great technology. My recycling company, for example, I didn't need $20 million. I couldn't even use $20 million. And it's like, I just need $1 million. I just need $2 million. So to enable smaller financing, that would really unlock a lot of change, I think.
Right. And you think if you're able to get financing even now for some of these plastics companies, would you be able to like get a return for those investments? I hate that we have to talk about it like that, to be honest. It makes me sick that we have to would you be able to make money on this money for us to save the planet?
Yeah.
But anyhow.
There are a lot of funds that are taking that bet. Yes. There are a few funds that are dedicated specifically to solving the plastic problem in Southeast Asia, and they've actually just started, one of them has just started a new fund in Latin America as well. So there definitely is, I think, money in it. As I said, the plastics industry is over $600 billion. It's worth that much. And the plastic recycling industry is also, I think it's like close to $50 billion and growing. That's the industry size. packaging is actually the fastest use of recycled material. So there's definitely money in the game, for sure. For sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I spoke with someone else. I wish I could remember his name, but he started an app called Climatize, which is helping to create better capital allocation to these projects that can have returns. Because there's a lot of projects that banks, from what I understand, aren't ready to take the risk to loan out funds to these projects. They don't understand it enough. But my guest in Climatize, basically him and his co-founder have done all sorts of schooling and researching, and they know these markets very well, so they can be able to see, okay, well, this project is going to be able to have a return, and so they're starting to get investments in creating their own kind of fund, but their Climatize app is more for like more like B2C. So
Yeah.
personal consumers can allocate some of their own funds to get a bit of a return. So yeah, maybe we need, again, it is sad that capital allocation is such a big part of this, because we've made capitalism the foundation for all of it, instead of having at least some sort of like planet alliance protection fund, or like something like that can go forward. But
actually, can I say that, so there are a lot of countries, the EU is one of them. Well, they make up many countries, Canada, for example.
Right.
There's something called extended producer responsibility, and it's basically, it is a tax. I know people don't love that word, but it taxes plastic producers and companies that are very dependent on plastic packaging. So like a Coca-Cola, for example. And they basically tax them and use that money to subsidize the recycling, the waste management stream, the plastic waste management stream. So from collection to sorting to recycling, which is fantastic. It's basically making people who are responsible, people who are using it to be responsible for the entire life cycle of plastics. And I think that's where we get into,
amazing.
I think that's amazing. And in general, with the climate crisis, when we think about consumption and materialism, where we get lost is that people who are producing do not think about the entire life cycle of that product, But EPR is pretty powerful. Unfortunately, it's not in every country. There has been a movement to push for global EPR, a voluntary standard, and we were actually piloting the very first global plastics. It's a plastic credit, essentially. But what's
because I missed, what does the EPR stand for?
Extended producer responsibility. And
Okay.
so the downside of that is it's only it's only within like specific countries, and it's only country specific. So if it was in Spain, then you would only be taxing Spanish companies, and you would be subsidizing Spanish companies. But the thing is that Coca-Cola, for example, produces all over the world. So yeah, they have an EPR tax in the EU, but they don't have one in Myanmar, where they are producing, right?
Wow.
And these are the places that really need more support, because they just don't have the financing available to them to establish collection and establish recycling. So it's pretty powerful. It's in the beginning stages. I mean, there are a lot of kinks to work out, for sure. It's not the end all be all, but as I said, it's really important for global brands. I think it's a voluntary credit, but if they could all get on board, I think it could be a really powerful tool to be able to finance projects that, like you said, banks don't want to touch, that investors feel are too risky, because these low-income countries are maybe a bit more unstable.
Right. Well, I definitely will hold my breath to wait for corporations to volunteer to be on these things. I think governments and consumers have to either force mandates or legislate.
Yeah.
And so I think the things, at least that I've got out of this, is that like every little bit really does help. And I think being just assuming everything's futile and being apathetic towards this is not the way anything gets done ever in the history of humanity. So I think we can reduce our consumption. We can be plastic narcs if we're beside our friends at the grocery stores. We can get more sustainable bottles, so not use plastics. This guy.
Yeah.
And I think just being aware of it, and hopefully more people like you that I think care so much about the planet will, not just do something, but even maybe run for local governments. And I think that's where the difference is really going to happen. I think there's a lot of apathy around government now for the sideshow that most most governments are right now. But if we have more people that actually care and run and get voted in, like I think we underestimate the massive change that we can make for movements like this. And some people won't like I'm sure if tomorrow people banned all sorts of single-use plastics, I would be annoyed that I would have to do something. But in the end, like I would realize that this is the right thing, and we would change accordingly. You know, so I do really, I'm super impressed and really inspired and appreciative of all the work that you do in this in this market, and to come in and to make me a little less dumb today on this topic. I do really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Wait, one more point. I have one more point to say.
Yeah.
That as regulations do come on board, we see like historically as well that technology and individuals can adapt to these policy changes like so rapidly. So it's it's possible. I think historically we've seen it's been successful. So yeah, don't lose faith. I think
don't lose hope. Don't lose faith. I like that. Thank you, Mimi.
Thank you so much.
So thanks for listening to No More, No Less. I appreciate the time you spent with me today. So please subscribe and rate the show if you enjoyed it. It'll help me create more amazing content and get that next little bit of validation that I so deeply crave. If you did enjoy it, well, that sucks. But to make sure, I think you should listen to my next 10 episodes and then decide. I mean, come on. Rome was not built in a day. I'm just getting warmed up here, guys. So thanks again. See you next time.